human quietly fixed the Queen's armor. He never expected to see her in tears. The crack was going to kill her. I found it at 11 minutes past midnight, third tray in, under a magnification lens I had borrowed from the calibration lab 2 decks below. The armory was empty except for me, the hum of the ventilation shaft above my head, and 26 suits of Veil battle plate laid out on steel tables like sleeping soldiers. I was supposed to be doing routine surface checks, sign the inspection sheet, note any cosmetic damage, move on. But my fingers stopped on the left vambrace of the 23rd suit, and I pressed down, and I felt it before I saw it. A hairline fracture, running diagonal across the inner load-bearing ridge. 4 centimeters, deep enough to matter, shallow enough that every automated scanner the Veil used would miss it entirely, because their scanners were tuned to detect external damage, not internal stress lines in a material that grew, rather than was manufactured. Veil armor is not metal, it is not composite, it is biomineral crystal, grown slowly over years from compounds secreted by the warrior caste's own body, shaped by pressure and ritual into plates that are simultaneously alive and not alive. It has memory. It has fracture mechanics unlike anything I had studied in my 2 years of engineering school back on the colony transport before everything went wrong. I had spent 6 years teaching myself how it worked, not because anyone asked me to, because I could not stop. I checked the tag on the suit. Her Imperial Majesty Veil Sora Keth, personal commission, return without alteration. I stood there for a long time, long enough that the ventilation shaft cycled twice and the overhead lighting dimmed to its overnight setting, casting everything in low amber, long enough for me to understand exactly what I was holding and exactly what it meant. The crack was positioned at the point where the vambrace absorbed the primary impact load on a downward parry. First serious engagement, first hard block, and the plate would shear. The force would transfer into the joint. At the velocity Veil warriors moved, the resulting injury would be catastrophic. The Queen of the Veil Imperium was going to walk into battle in armor that would break her arm at best and kill her at worst. The tag said return without alteration. I got out my tools. My name is Owen Calloway, and I am technically classified as a maintenance operative, 3rd grade, assigned to the lower armory deck of the Imperial generation ship Veil Prime, which is currently 17 months into a 4-year transit between star systems and contains approximately 600,000 Veil and just under 12,000 humans, all of us refugees from a world that no longer exists. We were the ones who made it to the evacuation ships in time. We carried nothing with us except whatever was in our hands the moment the first planetary strike hit. I had been carrying a repair kit, my father's actually, old and scratched and full of tools built for human hands fixing human things, none of which were useful in Veil space. I had spent the years since then adapting every single piece of it. The Veil gave us shelter, they gave us food and air and gravity, and a place to exist while our species figured out what came next. In return, we worked. The jobs they offered were the ones their own people would not take. Cleaning, hauling, maintenance on systems so far below the engineering caste's notice that no self-respecting Veil would crawl into a duct to fix a circulation valve. Most of the humans on this ship were angry about that arrangement. I understood the anger. I also understood that anger was not going to fix anything. I had taught myself Veil crystal repair in stolen hours and borrowed equipment, logging every unauthorized experiment under falsified maintenance codes, accumulating disciplinary flags I had never once looked at, because the material was extraordinary and I could not leave something extraordinary alone. I worked on the Queen's armor through the night. The crack required a matrix bond repair, which meant introducing a trace compound drawn from the armor's own base material into the fracture under precise heat and pressure, until the crystal re-knit along its natural grain. The compound had to be harvested from a donor piece. I had 3 fragments of scavenged Veil plate in my personal kit, kept there illegally for exactly this kind of situation, though I had never imagined this kind of situation. I ground the smallest fragment to powder under controlled conditions, mixed the compound by hand, applied it in 3 stages over 4 hours, holding the temperature steady with equipment that was absolutely not rated for this purpose, and which I had modified extensively without authorization. The bond took at 3 in the morning. I held the lens over it and the fracture was gone, not hidden, gone. The crystal had closed along its own grain, following the lines I had given it, and the repair was structurally stronger than the original material. I had done this before, on lesser pieces, and I knew the signature. Then I looked at the rest of the suit. There was so much history in it. The shoulder guards were asymmetric in a way that was not a manufacturing variation. One side was built up, reinforced, compensating for a body that had learned to carry weight on the left because the right side had been injured and healed and was never quite the same again. The neck plate had an extra layer of microcrystalline reinforcement that was not standard issue, added at some point by someone who understood that this particular body had been attacked from behind more than once and had decided to do something about it. And there were repairs. 11 of them, counting mine. I could read them in the material like tree rings, each one laid down at a different time under different conditions. The oldest were meticulous, done with full access to proper compound and proper equipment, the work of someone who had spent years studying this particular suit. The more recent ones were rougher, faster, the kind of work done by someone who knew what they were doing but was working in bad conditions, without enough material, without enough time, just trying to hold things together for one more engagement. The last 3 repairs before mine were extraordinary in a specific way. They were done badly by the standards of craft but perfectly by the standards of urgency. Every shortcut taken was the right shortcut. Every compromise was the minimum necessary compromise. Whoever had done them had understood the suit deeply enough to know exactly how little they could get away with, and had chosen to get away with exactly that much, nothing more, saving the last of what they had for the next crisis. I re-etched the section around my repair to match the surrounding engraving. I replaced one rivet that had been put in at an angle, probably in the dark, probably under time pressure. I polished the entire vambrace and then, because I could not stop myself, I polished the entire suit. At 5 in the morning I signed my work, which meant I encoded my identification into the matrix bond in a way that any competent Veil crystallographer would be able to read, and I sent the suit back through the return system with a note that said only, "Fracture found, repair completed, see technical log." 3 days later, 2 Veil soldiers came to the armory and told me, with great courtesy, that I was to come with them immediately. The throne room was not what I had expected. I had expected something ceremonial, something built to make a visitor feel small. What I found was a space that felt almost geological, carved from the same dark mineral glass that lined the upper decks, the walls rising to a ceiling I could barely see, the floor so smooth and dark it looked like frozen water. There was no throne. There was only the queen. She was 8 feet tall and she stood near a long table on which my repair work had been laid out under a scanning array. Her 6 limbs were folded in the resting configuration, but there was nothing relaxed about her posture. Her compound amber eyes caught the light in the room and held it the way a lens holds light, focusing it into something sharp. She looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then she said, in the clicking bass language of her people, which the implant behind my ear translated with its usual imperfect approximation, "You found a fracture in my personal armor and chose to repair it against a direct return order." "Yes," I said. "Explain your reasoning." I explained my reasoning. I told her about the fracture angle and the load-bearing implications. I told her about the matrix bond technique and why I believed it was structurally superior to the original. I used precise language and I did not apologize, because an apology would have meant I thought I had done something wrong, and I did not think I had done something wrong. I thought I had made a decision and I was prepared to account for it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You said the bond follows the natural grain of the crystal." "Yes." "Show me." She moved aside and I went to the table. I had brought a specific lamp from the armory, a narrow spectrum tool I had built myself, because I had known somehow that I might need it. I held it over the vambrace and the repaired site lit up faintly, a thin line of slightly different luminescence running through the crystal. Not a scar, not a blemish, a record. The material had closed, but the closure was visible if you knew how to look. "It glows," she said. "It remembers," I said. "The fracture existed. The repair does not hide that. It just means the fracture is no longer dangerous." She reached out with her smallest limb pair, the fine manipulation limbs usually kept folded close to her body, and touched the glowing line. Very gently. The way you touch something you are not sure is real. I kept talking. I do not know why, except that silence felt wrong in that moment and filling it felt necessary. I told her what else I had read in the suit. The asymmetric shoulder guards, the extra neck reinforcement, the 11 repairs and what each one said about the conditions under which it had been made. I told her that the last 3 repairs before mine had been done by someone who understood the suit at a level that went beyond professional knowledge. Someone who had learned it the way you learn a person, over years, paying attention. I said, "Whoever made those last repairs loved you." She went still in a way that was different from her earlier stillness. Before she had been composed. Now she was holding something in place with considerable effort. She said, "His name was Tail Keth Sora. He was my armorer for 19 years. He died in the engagement where the vambrace was cracked." I understood immediately. The field repair. Done in the dark, without enough compound. with hands that had managed somehow to do exactly the right thing despite everything. The last thing Tail Keth Sora ever did was fix her armor so she could survive a battle he did not. I said, "The return tag. Return without alteration." "I needed it to be as he left it," she said. The translation algorithm rendered her words in flat, even tones, because it was not sophisticated enough to carry what was underneath them. But I had spent 6 years learning to read things that instruments could not measure, and I heard it anyway. I could not look at it. I could not destroy it. I sent it to the armory because I did not know what else to do with it. I had erased the last thing Tail Keth Sora had ever given her. The thought hit me like something physical. I said, "I can show you where his work ends and mine begins. In the material. Under this light they are distinguishable. His bond lines run at a slightly different angle because he was working at speed and in the field, and the angle he chose was the correct one for those conditions. I followed his lines when I laid down mine. My repair is built on top of his, following his grain, not replacing it." She looked at the vambrace. She looked at it for a long time. "Show me," she said. I showed her. I walked her through every layer, his work and mine, the way they intersected and continued. I explained that what I had done was not a replacement. It was a continuation. His repair had kept the armor viable long enough for it to be brought somewhere safe. Mine had made it whole. Both were present in the material. Both were readable by anyone who knew how to look. Her fine limbs were still resting near the vambrace. Very lightly. Not touching the glowing line anymore. Just near it. She said, "You are not qualified for the position of Imperial Armorer." "No," I said. "You are not of the warrior caste. You do not have ceremonial credentials. You are a maintenance operative, 3rd grade, and you have accumulated 19 disciplinary flags for unauthorized use of restricted equipment and materials." 19, I said. I thought it was 17. Something shifted in her posture. My translation implant offered the word amusement, then immediately flagged its own uncertainty. I decided to accept it. "What would you require," she said, "to serve in this capacity?" I thought about it carefully, not because I needed time to decide, but because the answer had to be right. I told her I needed access to every repair record Tail Keth Sora had ever kept, if they existed. I told her I needed 6 months of study before I touched the suit again for anything beyond emergency repair, because I wanted to understand it the way he had understood it, from the foundation up. I told her I needed the disciplinary flags removed, not for pride but because 3 of them were currently blocking my access to the lower materials lab, where the only crystallography equipment on the ship that could support the work was housed. He said, "You spent 6 years breaking regulations to learn a skill no one asked you to learn, in order to fix things you were not authorized to fix." "Yes." "And then you broke my explicit instructions in order to repair armor that would have killed me." "Yes. Humans," she said, "are extremely strange." "We have heard that," I said. She appointed me on the spot. She did not convene a committee, or consult the Armorers Guild, or issue a decree. She simply said, "You will begin tomorrow." Then she said something in a register too low for my implant to catch, a private thing, meant only to be said aloud in an empty room. I was almost at the door when she spoke again. She said, "Owen Calloway." I stopped. She said, "I want you to know his name. Tail Keth Sora. He was not simply my armorer. He was my hatch-clutch kin, the closest bond my kind forms. He spent 19 years learning my armor the way I learn it myself, through the body, through combat, through damage and recovery. He knew every weakness before I discovered it. He fixed things before they broke me." I stood with my back to her and my hand near the door, and I felt the full weight of what I had walked into 3 days ago, when I picked up a magnification lens in an empty armory, at 11 minutes past midnight. I turned around. I said, "I will keep his name in the armor. Not written anywhere you can see, encoded in the repair record, in a notation method I will teach you to read. Every piece of work I do on the suit will carry a reference back to his foundational repairs. Anyone who reads the material in depth will understand that the armor has 2 authors." She was very still. Her amber eyes held the light. The fine limbs near the vambrace had gone quiet. 19 years, I said. He did not just fix your armor. He understood it. That kind of understanding does not disappear because the person is gone. It is still in the material. I can see it. I will build on it. That is the only honest way to do this work. I went back to the armory. I made coffee from the terrible instant stock we kept in the brake cabinet, because it was 6 in the morning and I had been awake for 26 hours, and I had just accepted a commission from the Queen of the Vale Imperium in a room that had no chairs. I sat on an equipment crate and drank my coffee, and opened the first of Tail Keth Sora's repair records, which had been transmitted to my terminal while I was walking back through the corridors. His notes were meticulous, detailed in a way that went beyond technical record-keeping. He wrote about the suit the way my grandmother wrote about instruments she had restored, noting not just what was done but why, what the material told him, what he had learned from each repair that he carried forward into the next one. There were sketches. There were passages in the lower register of veil writing that my implant flagged as personal notation, informal language, the kind not meant for official records. I did not try to translate those passages. They were not for me. I read everything else twice. Then I picked up a tool and I began the first of the assessment scans I had promised myself I would complete before touching the suit again. Outside the armory port windows, the stars were moving slowly in the long dark between systems. 12,000 humans on a ship built for 600,000 Veil, all of us traveling toward a world we had never seen, carrying what we could carry. My father's repair kit was on the shelf above my workstation, scratched and old and adapted piece by piece over 6 years into something that could work with material it was never designed to touch. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the fastest or the most logical or the most ancient or the most feared. We are the ones who, when we find something broken, sit down and stay there until we understand it. We are the ones who keep other people's names in the work long after the people are gone. We are the ones who teach ourselves things no one asked us to learn, in borrowed hours, with borrowed tools, because we cannot tolerate leaving a crack unattended. The Queen's armor was on the table in front of me, whole now, the fracture sealed. Tail Keth Sora's repairs still readable in the crystal for anyone who looked with the right light and the right knowledge. I picked up my tools. There was a lot of work to do.